Good evening, friends, party members and associates. Welcome to the weekly broadcast from the Workers' Party of Britain. Never let it be said that we don't treat you, and as George is busy this evening with other commitments, we have instead asked our deputy leader to lead our address and converse with our comrades. So, without further ado, I'm privileged and proud to present to you one of the best speakers in Christendom, the magnificent oracle, the girl they couldn't hang, Joti Brar. Okay, we appear to have a technical hitch. Rob, are you there? Oh, there you go.
What's the problem?
It's okay, we got Joti now. Here you go, Jotes.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Can you see me?
We can.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much, Tess, for that fantastic introduction. I was in slight trepidation at what you were going to say. I can just about live with that, I think. Welcome, everybody, to our broadcast. If you were hoping for George, I'm sorry that you have to be disappointed this week. I'll do my best to fill what are very big shoes. First of all, we do, on behalf of all of our members, have to send a message of greeting and solidarity to George and to his family. As most of our members and many of our viewers will know, he received very serious death threats over the internet this week, so serious that he had to leave his home with his family for some time. Thankfully, the perpetrator has been arrested, is being charged, and it hasn't interrupted in any way George's vigour. He's been on the hustings, the virtual hustings this week. He's done a campaign launch for the Alliance for Unity up in Scotland, and we're absolutely sure that he's going to go from strength to strength, undeterred by this. But it's been a pretty horrific episode for all concerned. I also need to start off by talking a little bit about Paul Burrows, our first ever election candidate who stood in the recent council by-election up in Helensburgh, did a fantastic job for us in very, very difficult circumstances where it wasn't really possible to do any real electioneering, and where the Workers' Party is brand new and the people there haven't really heard of it. And of course, it's a Tory stronghold as an area. It's not our natural recruiting ground, but Paul did a great job of putting down a marker for the Workers' Party. It's work we intend to build on in the coming elections in May and over the coming years. And it's a really important moment for us, this first election campaign. And we extend, real hearty congratulations to Paul for all the work he put in on that campaign. And we're sure in the future he'll be doing more and building a really good branch for the party up in Helensburgh. I wanted to talk this evening a little bit about anniversaries. It's been a week of really significant anniversaries, and some of them have been covered extensively in the newspapers, others have been completely ignored. So of course the most obvious one is the anniversary day before yesterday of the lockdown, 1 year since we went into lockdown as the COVID pandemic was spreading rampantly through our population. And of course, the media coverage there has been fairly extensive, but very much along the lines of, let's have an inquiry sometime in the future to learn mistakes. No real desire on the part of the establishment to hold our government or the corporations that he serves to account for their criminal negligence, the humongous death toll that was totally avoidable, and their rampant profiteering at the expense of the lives, the health, the sanity and the jobs of the mass of British working class. So that was the lockdown, but there have been some other big anniversaries this week. There was the 18th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, which George is very much associated with. He was well known at the time and ever since has been ruthless in his determination to pursue those and who were responsible and hold them accountable. But the Iraq War was a really significant moment in the history of this country. Not only because, you know, it was a totally unjustified, illegal, unsanctioned internationally war in which Britain, you know, was a very, very willing second to the US imperialism in ravaging a country for no other reason than that it dared to try to uphold its independence in the face of imperialist diktat. But that war, which Britain went to, led by a Labour government, the government of Tony Blair, that war was waged absolutely in the teeth of the opposition of the mass of the British people. We saw before that war the biggest ever demonstration, the biggest ever anti-war movement on the streets of Britain. And the war was waged despite the opposition of those people and this anti-war sentiment of the mass of the people of Britain. And that really started a cascade. It was really a big moment in turning many, many people in Britain off their sense of faith in the establishment. It provoked a huge cynicism with the media, the establishment, the corporations who benefited from the war, the politicians who served them. At the beginning of this, what has now become absolutely endemic amongst the working class, a recognition that these people don't represent us. The politicians don't represent us, they represent the corporations. The media are not holding truth to power, they are regurgitating the lies of the powerful in order to keep us confused and stupid and ill-informed. And that cynicism has only grown since the Iraq War. Then 8 years later, led this time by a Tory government, but one which had been very much emboldened by the Labour government that preceded it, we had David Cameron's government launching the war against Libya. And of course, simultaneously with that, just 3 days earlier, the beginning of the invasion of Syria took place. That was a covert war, which has been waged by proxy forces, but nevertheless, very much with the involvement, backing militarily, financially, and also in terms of media, of that destabilizing invasion campaign to try to destroy the Syrian government and secular state. And at the same time as that, in the same week, the NATO bombing of Libya was launched by Cameron and Obama. And this was another pivotal moment, not only for the world and for the Middle East, where another independent, secular government, which had been a bastion of anti-imperialism, not only in the region, but all over the world, was destroyed by the imperialists, wantonly, criminally, torn to pieces because it refused to obey their commands. It was also a really important moment in the anti-war movement, because we saw that Stop the War, having presided over a huge demonstration in 2003 against the Iraq War, had actually done nothing with the mass movement that was mobilized at that time against the war. Quite the reverse. That movement was slowly demobilized. The strength of those people who came out against the Iraq War was never used. It was never used to actually stop the war in the way it could have been. There were 2 million people on the streets in February 2003. 2 million people could definitely have sabotaged the war machine, could have stopped economic life in the city of London. They could have occupied all sorts of important buildings. They could have done all kinds of direct actions. They could have refused to allow the war to go ahead. By their very presence, all of those people, if their power had been harnessed properly, but instead they were sent home with congratulations for walking through the streets, what a good job they'd done, as the bombers were flying over their heads, going the other way. off to Iraq. And because the power of those people was never harnessed, the education that the people who joined that movement got was, there's no point in mobilizing against the war. There's no point joining a mass movement. Nothing will happen. The government will do what it wants to do anyway. And so that cynicism against the politicians was reinforced by a cynicism about the pointlessness of trying to take action, trying to collectively change things. And Stop the War really reached its nadir. The official anti-war movement of this country reached its nadir at the time of the Libya war. Because just as the attack dogs of NATO were lining up to destroy Libya, the anti-war movement, so-called, was demonstrating not against NATO, but against NATO's target. They called demonstrations against the government of Muammar Gaddafi. That's the action they chose to take at the time of the Libya war, completely demobilizing the British people's opposition to the Libya war, which they did oppose it. But the official anti-war movement behaved as if the target, the object of the war was a good object. It was right to want to get rid of Gaddafi, and it's only really the method that was a problem and not the aim. The regime change aim was sanctioned by the anti-war movement rather than opposed. And this is really exposes completely the need for an anti-war movement that's based in the working class, that has the desire as well as the ability to oppose war meaningfully, to oppose the imperialist, the neoliberal ruling class and their aims and objectives meaningfully, and not to turn every protest movement into merely a campaign vehicle for electing a Labour government, which is all that Stop the War ever really was. And there's one more anniversary I want to talk about before I open the floor up to the contributions of our members this evening. And that is that it's the 150th anniversary, or it was last Thursday, of the Paris Commune. The Paris Commune was the first ever attempt by working class people to take and to hold power. And it was a fantastic and heroic effort and endeavor. And it set the scene. It gave the template, the very beginning kernel of the template for how a socialist society can and will organize itself. And it was greeted by the socialists of the time, people like Marx and Engels, with huge joy and enthusiasm as really the harbinger of a new world. And it's something really significant and important for workers to know, to study, to understand, all the wonderful things they were achieved in the 70 days that they held on to power in Paris. They achieved wonderful things. And these are things that need to be studied by workers and understood and embraced and celebrated. And there was no mention from what I saw in the papers of that really significant anniversary. No coverage at all, although we have endless speculation. And what's really noticeable about our newspapers these days is how much of what we get is not news. It's not the important facts and events that are affecting us. It's not the massive rise in unemployment, inequality, poverty, homelessness, hunger, and what it is that we can do about those things, or what's really at the root of those things. There's endless speculation. It's not news at all. You tune into a discussion about tomorrow's papers, and what you'll get is two people equally uninformed making guesses about what may happen at some point in the future to do with when the lockdown may or may not be lifted, whether or not we'll be going on holiday, whether or not it's Brexit's fault that there's been a drop-off in trade, whether or not the royal family should have diversity training. Speculation after speculation after speculation about things, that none of the people talking about really know what they're on about. And it fills up the airtime and it fills up the column inches, but there's nothing in the media, or almost nothing, that really relates to the issues that matter to ordinary people, and certainly doesn't relate them in a way that is meaningful or useful to us. And so when we come back and think about what we want to do in the coming period with the elections, it's really to start to rebuild a sense of class consciousness amongst the workers of Britain. That's what we need in order to start to organise ourselves and fight back. We have to recognise this is not our media. These are not our politicians. There is no difference. And it's one of the great strengths of the Workers' Party that we can say so loudly and so clearly, there is no difference between the Tory party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, the Green Party. They all represent the same master, and that master is the enemy of the working class. When that enemy is doing well, they're doing well off the backs of the poverty and misery of the poor. Our interests are not the same as the interests of the ruling elites. They are not the same. They are directly opposed to one another. And this is a message that the working class has to start to get hold of properly in order that it can rebuild its organisation and start to fight back.
Joti, brilliant. It's so good to hear you and see you so different to George. A real big contrast, but what a team. What a team. Robin in the chat was just saying, Joti should be Prime Minister, and loads of people agreed. And so, yeah, okay, all right, one day. First though, we're going over to Andrew. He's going to have a chat with us now. Can you wait there, Andrew?
There we are. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good. Off you go, Dal.
Oh, no, well, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Joti, for that fantastic talk. Obviously, totally in agreement with everything said. So tonight, I just want to say a little bit about the situation in Hartlepool. As many of you know, there is a by-election coming up there. And the point I kind of want to go on is how this is symptomatic of a corrupt and decaying system, which has been years in the making. So first, just a little bit about Hartlepool. I mean, this is a town that is a solidly working class area, but it's also an area that's incredibly deprived and has been deprived for a long time. And the levels of deprivation are quite staggering. So just a few little things. I mean, this is a town with the highest unemployment rate in England, the third worst for child poverty in the northeast, and the 14th highest for fuel poverty in England. And I always kind of think of something that's often heard from representatives of the Labour Party, that you know, we have to vote Labour, we have to back the Labour Party, and we can't split the vote because if we vote anyone but Labour, we'll get in the Tories and horrendous austerity, and we need the night of Labour to save us from the dragon of Toryism. And to do this, they blackmail the working class and they threaten them with the threat of the Tories. And they've got the working class over a barrel with this. To do what? To support a party which is fundamentally no different from the Tory party or any of the mainstream parties for that matter. And speaking of Hartlepool itself, I mean, this is an area that for 47 years has had Labour MPs. But having Labour representation in Hartlepool doesn't seem to have done the people of Hartlepool much good. And also there's a little point about actually a big point about the referendum. I mean, Hartlepool had a pretty big turnout, I mean, phenomenally big turnout. I mean, 65.5% of the population eligible to vote turned out to vote. Of that, 69.6%, and in real numbers, that's over 32,000, in fact, 32,071 people voted to leave the European Union in 2016. And this has also showed itself in Hartlepool Borough Council, which is ruled by a pro-Brexit administration and dominated by pro-Brexit councillors. So I think there's a strong sign of discontent with the system, which, of course, was shown so visibly during the referendum. Now, just about the election in Hartlepool, I won't dwell on Mike Hill, the now former MP, who I think is just another representation of this kind of sleaze that's present in the system. But the man who's been picked, or who Labour wants to represent the people of Hartlepool, of course, Dr. Paul Williams, middle class, privately educated, arch Remainer, who fought for a second referendum. So, of course, that's just what the people of Hartlepool want, isn't it? They really want this middle class arch Remainer. Well, obviously not, considering both the borough elections and the referendum. But we know why he's being chosen. It's because he's the kind of chap who Keir Starmer can work with. He's got the right attitude, quote unquote, about Europe. It's jobs for the boys. It's the same old kind of thing that we'd find with all the Tonians and the old boys network. He's someone who lost his seat rightly because of his opposition to democracy. And now they want to push him into this area, which he obviously clearly doesn't represent in either his beliefs or his background. So I think this just goes to show how out of touch Labour is with Hartlepool and with the people of Hartlepool. But on a wider kind of note, this is, I think Hartlepool is emblematic of years of neglect and half solutions and false solutions of the Labour Party, but of all the big business backed mainstream parties across the Northeast and across the country. And the growing and increasing social problems, that we see increasing year after year. I mean, just to name a few, the issues of crime, antisocial behaviour, family breakup, mental health crisis, the rise in suicide rate, especially among working class men, young working class men. Another issue, which of course affects Hartlepool greatly. And every year we get the same tired, old, neoliberal, gradualist, reformist sort of talk. And it's simply not sufficient. I think this was something used at last week's meeting. It's simply not sufficient to deal with the problems that modern Britain faces. But thinking optimistically, I'm very pleased that we have the Workers' Party now, because I believe we do have a party and a programme that will both win back the working class, especially from the influence of the right, but also, and most importantly, to build a great socialist Britain, which will benefit all the working class. So hopefully the people of Hartlepool will see sense and come the by-election will vote for the Workers' Party candidate. Thank you very much, comrade. That's all I've got to say. Cheers.
Brilliant. Really fantastic contribution there. Thank you. I think you're absolutely right that Hartlepool is a really prime example of how the Labour Party has, for decades, been revealed as a party that cares nothing for the working class, will not lift a finger to help the working class in its time of need. As industrial jobs have left Britain and areas which were proud industrial manufacturing centres have been left with absolutely nothing, the Labour Party councils and MPs that represent them have done absolutely nothing to help the people who live there in so many places. And you say that in Hartlepool now there are many councillors who are Brexit favouring, and that's a relatively new phenomenon. Obviously, for decades, the councils in all of those types of places across the Red Wall, they didn't just have red MPs, they had red councils as well. And in all of those places, when the jobs were going, when unemployment was rising, when poverty was deepening, when cuts were, were destroying services, did those Labour Party representatives, so-called, get together to defend the communities and defy what was coming from the centre? Did they? Hell. Did they lead one single sit-in for one library? Never mind barricading the gates of a factory and saying, no, we're going to take it over and take over production ourselves. We're going to do something here for our people. We're going to keep this jobs going. Did they do any of those things, which the people who represented them sort of assumed that they are supposed to do, right? Defend the working class. Did they do any of that, despite having been elected to every single position across the red wall? They did nothing. They let the people sink. And they treated them with total contempt, and they are still doing. Bringing Paul Williamson in is exactly another case of the same thing, of treating these people with absolute contempt. It reminds you entirely of Hillary Clinton, when she was feeling like she didn't have to campaign in certain states, where she ended up losing out to Donald Trump, because it was assumed by the Democrats that blue-collar workers had no one else to vote for. And she called them a basket of deplorables. She was publicly demeaning towards these people, totally assumed that they got no choice but to vote for her or vote no one. That's exactly how Labour has treated the working class across the industrial heartlands of Britain, the deindustrialised heartlands of Britain, for 4 decades. And they are still doing it. They learn nothing, because they are focused on serving the ruling class, not on serving the working class. And it's so clear that that's the case. What is also clear is the Workers' Party is not going to have an easy run of it in Hartlepool. I can already see gearing up, just as I saw more than 20 years ago when I joined Arthur Scargill's Socialist Labour Party, which was a first attempt to oppose Tony Blair and create a socialist alternative, that as soon as that party was announced as wanting to pull all the left together and form a meaningful electoral alternative, suddenly the Trotskyites and the left Labour hangers-on and all of the lovers of the Labour Party from the outside of the Labour Party formed a new alliance whose only purpose was to stop the Socialist Labour Party making headway. And we can expect that there is going to be some of that. And I would appeal now to all right-thinking socialists, do not be fooled by any of the talk of these other Trotskyite or revisionist organizations who say that they are socialist and will all want to put up candidates in Hartlepool. It makes no sense. If we want to start to rebuild a fighting force in Britain for the working class, there needs to be one single candidate representing the working class, representing socialism. The Workers' Party is the best placed party to do that. We call on all socialists to support our candidate and our campaign and make a real difference for the people of Hartlepool who desperately need it.
Brilliant, thanks, Joti. Where else do you get passion like this in a party, and such brilliant candidates as well? Because Andrew is one of our candidates up in the Midlands. So if you want to find out more about him, you can check him out on our website. I'll give you the deets at the end. Next up, we've got our Chris. Are you there, Chris?
I am.
You're there.
Tess, can you hear us?
Hi.
You can? That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, it's an honour to speak after our deputy leader Joti and Andrew before her. He's a fine example of one of the scores of fantastic party candidates we've got at the Workers' Party going into the mayor election, and I had the pleasure of interviewing him just last week. Which hopefully you should in the next few days be able to see excerpts of that interview of. And we are aiming to interview all our candidates and showcase them on the various party platforms that we've got. So it's going to be very important to follow us on all those platforms, or as many as you can, or what you're already on. And if you're not already doing so, do follow us on them and do share the party posts, because it's vitally important in the coming weeks leading into early May, that we engage as many people who you are following, to make them aware of the candidates that we've got. Now, we've got a range of different platforms the Workers' Party have. So if you're on Facebook, make sure you do follow us and like the Facebook page on there. Ditto on YouTube. Give us a follow on there. We've got, over the course of 14 months, we've only been a party, but we've got a huge library of resources. We've got lots of different playlists, including the local elections, so you'll be able to keep abreast if you've missed any of our broadcasts or missed any of the social media we've put out. You'll be able to see on there that, and do share it on your social media, whichever of those social media that you're on. We've also on Instagram at Workers Party GB. And you can also catch us on the latest platform that we've got, which is on Telegram. And our Telegram on there is t.me / Workers Party Britain. t.me / Workers Party Britain. And I would really strongly recommend you get onto Telegram, because what with all the various issues we've had with WhatsApp, with security issues to do with privacy, it's the place to go anyway. So do get yourself on there and do follow the party on there. And not only the party, but do follow Joti on there and George on there. And it's at t.me / Joti Brar or t.me / George Galloway. And there's lots of material that goes on there, as well as on the various other social media I've outlined too. The last thing I want to mention is about the Twitter. We're very active on there as well. We've got regional DM groups, direct messaging groups, which covers all the regions. So we've got comrades, party members that's already on there. But if you're not already in one of them DM groups, if you're active on Twitter, do give me an email at chris@workerspartybritain.org. That's chris@workerspartybritain.org. Let us know your full name and your postcode, so I can verify that you are a member, and I will drop you into your regional group. Those people on Zoom, members on Zoom there, I will put some of these details into the Zoom chat in case you missed that. And those members or people thinking about joining us, do look back at this broadcast and take a note of those platforms, and do give us a follow and do give us a share. Thank you very much, Joti. Thank you very much, Tess. Thanks everyone for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And really important at this moment to congratulate Chris in particular for the phenomenal work that he's done over the last 14 months with the party's social media, and the whole of the team who work with him. You know, there is a media blackout when it comes to our party. You wouldn't know from the mainstream media that our party exists. We have to find other ways to reach people, and we're doing everything we can to do that, despite the fact that there's also a concerted campaign by the social media giants to mess with our algorithms, to defriend our friends, unfollow our followers and all the rest of it, you know, to stop our growth in its tracks. It's very clear that we represent a threat to the establishment, and for all of their claims to be up for free speech and free political debate, they do not want our voices to be heard. So anything that we can do to make sure our voice is heard, we must do. We must use every possible platform available to us to get the message out that we exist and that we represent something entirely different than the career politicians that you get in all the other parties, who are only out, as we said before, to represent the interests of the corporate elites. Now, when the lockdown is over, and that's coming very soon now, and with the elections, that's going to help, we will be hitting the streets everywhere. Our main aim from these elections, as well as to get, you know, hopefully some candidates elected in various places, but whether or not that happens, the main aim really for us is to build awareness of our party on the streets, on the doorsteps. We are intending to canvass, we're intending to put leaflets through as many doors as possible in this country. People need to know we exist, and we need to build up our network of branches so that we can start to have real face-to-face communication with the class that we aim to be able to represent in the coming years. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to all the media team and the fantastic job that you do. It's really appreciated and you know, worthwhile.
Yeah, thanks, Josie, and thanks, Chris. Yeah, those guys do awesome work getting all the videos together and putting all the little do-do-do-do-do-do's together that you see on social media. So if anybody out there in the party fancies taking any footage of things going on around their area, things that they might, you know, like video footage or anything like that, any industry, any interesting things going on, send them to the team. Anything you want to say, little snippets of things that are on your mind, send them to us or send them to Chris, and they'll make some little videos of you, and we can all spread the word. Mainstream media completely ignore us, as we know, and the Morning Star, the only left-wing paper out there, ignored us for ages, and suddenly last week decided that they were going to like diss George. And I've written for the Morning Star many times, and I won't be doing that again. So, right, moving on. We have lovely Jess now. She's going to have a chat with us about mental health. Are you there, Jess? Can you unmute?
Oh, are you there?
Yeah, hiya. I just wanted to say, first of all, sorry if I do speak really fast or slow or loud or quiet. It's just because of my anxiety. So yeah, basically, at the last meeting, I heard someone say a little bit about mental health, and it did just make me want to say a little bit about it, because you mentioned about CBT and about people getting help with that. And I just kind of thought, in general, from my experiences in life and from just speaking to other people, and the media and stuff that I've seen, there is like a big misrepresentation on mental health, and it causes all sorts of issues. One being that you might feel a certain way about yourself, and another being about either not being able to get support or getting the right support. So whether that's like, you know, if you're in education or if you're at a job, because people make assumptions and they think certain things, and it is just down to how certain mental health issues or mental health issues as a whole is represented. So like, for example, if I were to tell people my symptoms of anxiety, I could not say that's what anxiety is, because that would be a lie. That's just what it is to me. Somebody else will experience different things. And I've had it before in job interviews where I've been asked if I have mental health issues, specifically anxiety and depression. And, you know, they'll make an assumption and they'll be like, oh yeah, you're not going to handle stressful situations. You know, we need somebody that can work in a stressful environment. And I really don't like that. I mean, there are going to be some people, and maybe they'll never be able to, but a lot of the time it can depend on the person and the situation, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of time as well. And yeah, just in general, just like making assumptions, what works for somebody else won't work for me, and what works for me won't work for somebody else, and you miss out on opportunities in life. And you know, it's like, I know when like people have panic attacks, I've heard a lot that if someone were to touch them whilst they're having a panic attack, that's like a big no-no, that could make everything so much worse. Whereas for me, it's something that can really calm me down. And obviously that can have serious consequences, because if you don't know, you can do the wrong thing. You can make things so much worse. So I hope that made some sense. Struggling a little bit with my words right now.
That was very clear and very poignant contribution, Jess, and quite an important one, I think, because you've highlighted some very crucial issues which are at the core of our policy. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for, you know, braving your nerves to come on camera and talk to us about your experience. It's, you know, be proud. There's a couple of issues you've brought up that I really want to look at, because there's two ways, aren't there, of looking at the mental health crisis that we face in this country, and neither of them are being addressed properly. Because on the one hand, there's all these people in desperate need of support and good services to help them to recover to the best that they can. And those services aren't there, they're not freely available, they're not available when they're needed, where they're needed, free of charge, and in the amount and the depth that they're needed. But there's another issue also, which is that no one is addressing the root causes of the explosion of mental health issues in our society. There's no doubt that there is an explosion. I'm feeling it in my own family. I see it everywhere amongst so many of the people who I know and I mix with on a daily basis. You know, you must see that too, Jess. You must, you know, one of the things at least you can see is that you are definitely not alone with these issues. It is absolutely endemic in our population that there's a mental health crisis, and we are not addressing root causes. And so many of those root causes are social, and they need social solutions. It's not about your somehow failing to deal with life. It's the life that you're being landed with is not supporting you to develop as you could and should. And that's what we really have to notice and understand. There's a social causes, social roots that have to be looked at and addressed. One thing you talked about just there, I can't go into all of the social issues all, you know, in the next 2 minutes, but one thing that I will highlight, which you talked about, was jobs. Now, fundamentally, your experience is jobs are rationed. And therefore, someone looks at you and says, well, you're not quite 100% perfect, so why should I bother trying to employ you? It could be difficult. It might be, you know, they do it with all women, and you might be going to have a baby. That's not very efficient. You know, employers feel like, well, why should I make any effort to employ someone who might take some effort to facilitate, to do their best in the job? They don't want to. They just see it as money that and time that they don't want to spend. And why should they? It's a fierce, competitive, you know, market out there. Our demand, the socialist demand, is quite the opposite. The whole point, as far as we're concerned, of society is to benefit the people. And everybody has an ability to contribute something. And if we're not taking those contributions, we are squandering our most important resource, which is people. The best asset a society has is its people. And the worst crime that capitalism commits is to waste so much valuable human potential and throw it away like it's nothing. And that's what socialism is all about. Socialism says people first, everybody who can contribute must contribute to the best of their ability and be supported to do it, have useful, meaningful work to do. Useful, meaningful, that helps society, where you know the work you're doing benefits the whole of society, including you, is raising us all up and making our lives better. Our demand is useful jobs for everybody who is capable of working and contributing to society. That is the way we will build a better society. Thanks, Jess.
Fantastic, Joti. And Jess, you're a legend. I mean, that's hardcore brave. It's I've heard you talk in smaller groups, but just one time, but hearing you talk here to our deputy leader, you didn't show any trace of anxiety or fear or anything. You know, you're clearly a really good speaker, and it doesn't show. If they don't want you, we'll have you. So brilliant. Bring it on. It's so nice to have youth in here as well. We're all a bit old. All right, okay, next. We've got Tim. Are you there, Tim? Can you unmute, lad? Tim C?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Am I on? I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed. Off you go, sir.
Thank you, Tess. Good evening, everyone. Now, Andrew, in Hartlepool, I don't want you to give me a dose of the gamma rays here, but I have to make a confession right up front that I represent the middle-class, privately educated wing of the party. So, you know, be nice to me, treat me gently. But as any of you will know from my tweets, I was a member of the Labour Party for 40 years until relatively recently. And for all the reasons that Andrew highlighted, I got disenchanted, fed up, and I just can't do it anymore. I cannot have any sense of alignment or engagement with, frankly, what is basically a wing of the Conservative Party, or what it seemed to be. I mean, the only one thing I did want to say, Andrew, also is that the one little bright spot you want to keep in mind in Hartlepool is, of course, that your football team is second in the National League and heading for a good chance of getting the playoffs and maybe promotion. So as a football fan, I've always, you know, keep an eye out for their results. But tonight I'm going to sort of go on to a slightly different track, and I'm going to say 3 words, and then I'm going to link them together, well, briefly, and hopefully with a degree of concision and something that will make sense. The 3 words are Greenshill, Wirecard, and Shrewsbury. Let me explain those a little bit more. So some of you may or may not have seen in the news, but there is in essence, a sort of shadow, I'm going to call it, banking company called Greenshill, of which David Cameron was an advisor. Long story short, it was set up by a chap called Lex Greenshill, Australian, got very close to Cameron when Cameron was Prime Minister. Greenshill is in essence what they call a trade finance company. So what it does, in essence, in terms of its purest business model, it simply will take invoices that are owed to a company and pay them early. So if you're, say, a small company and you supply a bigger company, you can, in essence, get the money for your invoice less a discount so that you get it paid early. Or alternatively, big companies will bring together all of their invoices. They'd, in essence, give it to a company like Greenshill. Greenshill would pay them all, and then in due course, the Greenshill will get the full amount from the supplier. Pay the full amount to the supplier, and then the company would pay a fee to Greenshill for, in essence, expediting that payment. As a basic business model, it's perfectly legit. It smooths the cash flows, particularly for smaller companies. Now, cutting to the chase on this, what Greenshill have done and why they're now in a serious amount of trouble and in administration is they were doing basically dodgy stuff on the back of this baseline business model. And what they were in essence doing is they were inflating their income. They were making assumptions that there are future business which they didn't have. And what they were actually doing also is they were taking the loans that they had given through this invoice financing, they were packaging them up, a process that the finance guys and girls call securitization. They were packaging them up, and then they were selling them as through banks like Credit Suisse, in particular Credit Suisse. They were selling them as investment securities. So basically, it's a bit of a caravan. And the caravan has come to a crashing halt because it became very clear that actually the financing of Greenshill was not sound. And in essence, it had a load of loans outstanding which were not backed up by any assets. And the companies that would insure that securitization process, they pulled back. Credit Suisse has closed the accounts that it had and these funds which were selling these so-called securities, and Greenshill is in the mire. But why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant, one, because actually it just highlights that the sort of very clever chicanery of so-called advanced capitalism is actually in so many cases predicated on a con. Second, is very interesting that Cameron, who had sponsored and in fact ensured the awarding, I think, of an MBE to this chap Lex Greenshill, that Cameron was an advisor to the company. He was awarded a load of share options. Had those share options been realised, in other words, had Greenshill's business model continued, he would have realised millions of pounds from the value of those share options. They're actually worth nothing now. And what has also transpired is in the last year that he himself, Cameron, made direct representations to Rishi Sunak to, in essence, secure loans, further loans under the coronavirus loan scheme from the government for Greenshill. So, and now when Cameron is being challenged, he refuses to answer any questions. He's gone radio silent, and no surprises there. And what happens? The Commons Treasury Select Committee has decided not to investigate this. Well, is it? But you might ask yourself, well, isn't this all this load of rich guys losing money? Who cares? Well, actually, Greenshill have ended up as being one of the key suppliers to Liberty Steel, to the steel industry in this country. And now Liberty Steel is at risk because its financing is being cut because Greenshill was in essence the backer. And the owner of Liberty Steel, who's been able to take advantage of the financing arrangement that they had, and he had through his broader company called GFG, which operated worldwide. What's happened with that individual? Well, he was in essence being able to secure this financing through Greenshill to keep the business going. What he's actually done, for example, in the last 12 months, has been buying prime London property in his wife's name, apparently in his wife's name, for many millions of pounds, separate of course from his business assets. But what was the funding coming from his company? From this company, Greensill. What's happening to Greensill? Greensill is collapsing. So it's a very interesting, and what also happens, we can see that an ex-Prime Minister was an advisor for Greensill, stood to gain a very substantial amount, I mean millions of pounds, if the share options had come to fruition, and actually was badgering to try to get additional coronavirus loans for this company at a time when it would have been clear that it was in trouble. So that's one of my three. I'm going to bring it now to the second one, which is Wirecard. Wirecard, based in Munich, a payments company, which has been in existence for about 10 years. In essence, though, it has collapsed and is subject to a massive fraud of something around £2 billion, where, in essence, what has become clear is a fraud perpetuated by the senior executives of that company. And why should that matter? Because actually Wirecard also underwrites the funding for a lot of businesses through payments processing. And in addition, was the German regulator, BaFin, the German regulator of financial services companies, actually sued and sought to have convicted Financial Times journalists who had exposed the fraud and the corruptness within Wirecard much earlier from its form, from when it came public. It had been a story in the financial press led by the FT for a long time before it actually came to fruition. What did the German regulator? The German regulator actually attacked the financial journalists who were exposing this corruption and this fraud by arguing that they were trying to benefit from insider dealing. So again, what we see there is we see the forces of establishment circling the wagons to protect corruption that feeds through to the broader financial system, which hits real people in real jobs, like for today, steel workers who work for Liberty Steel, who will be worried about what's going to happen to their jobs and what's going to happen to their industry because of this rather opaque and frankly dodgy financing of their company through what Greensill did. And I link that then through finally with the third of my three, so Greensill, Wirecard and Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury, yesterday the Court of Appeal overturned the conviction of the Shrewsbury pickets from 50 years ago. Now, the most well-known of those Shrewsbury pickets, this was the national building strike in the early 1970s. There was the working conditions in the building industry at that time, I mean, they can still be very dangerous, but at that time were appalling. The death and injury rate was extreme, payment was irregular, the way that workers were treated was utterly intolerable. And there was a national building strike led by the trade unions. The most famous of the pickets, many people will know, Ricky Tomlinson, who's the actor, subsequently became an actor. So Ricky Tomlinson was one of those Shrewsbury pickets. And what happened? The Court of Appeal has overturned the convictions on the basis that witness statements at the time were not tampered with by the police, but were destroyed by the police. Witness statements which would have undercut the prosecution case were destroyed by the police. In addition, there was further pressure put at the time, including a highly contentious documentary run during the period of the trial itself called Reds Under the Bed, and in essence trying to paint Ricky Tomlinson, Des Warren and the other senior pickets as violent people who were determined to intimidate and force people out of working during the strike. 50 years. Oh, and in addition, by the way, Ricky Tomlinson, Des Warren, they went to prison. They went to prison for Ricky Tomlinson for 3 years. I think Des Warren for 6 years. Des Warren is dead. He died some years ago, broken by his experience. It took them 50 years to get justice, 50 years. So what is the thread I'm drawing from Greensill, from Wirecard and from Shrewsbury? The link for me is very simple, that when it comes to protecting the interests of working people, when it comes to ensuring social justice and that people are properly treated, when it comes to challenging the chicanery, the opacity, and frankly, the downright dodginess of a lot of financial transactions designed to enrich a small number of people, when it comes to that, governments won't protect us. Governments don't protect. We can only get the action that we need to protect people if we make sure that we apply the right pressure all the time, we make sure that we collectively organise properly, and that we fight and challenge at every step of the way. That is the only way to challenge what happens and to make sure that we don't wait 50 years for injustice to be corrected, and we don't allow financial chicanery to enrich a small number of people at the expense of workers who are trying to do an honest day's work and deliver a vital product for the UK, steel, and to make sure that we don't allow intrepid journalists who want to expose malfeasance and wrongdoing to be, in essence, intimidated out from doing what they need to do. And it brings back to the point that Joti raised earlier about media coverage of the Workers' Party. Of course, what we do is going to be suppressed or ignored, because actually what we have to say is highly relevant. And what we have to say gels and resonates with people because it relates to the real lived experiences they have, the unfairness, the injustice, and the prejudice they witness and experience day to day. So when they have an organised group of people who can explain that, explain it clearly in a way that makes sense to people, and put forward policies which actually address the causes of that injustice and that prejudice and that poverty in the first place, of course, vested interests don't like it, and they have a vested interest to prevent people hearing it. So our responsibility is to make sure our voice is heard, loud and clear, and always. So, and that is the key point I want to get across for us, I think, tonight. Loud, clear, and always. And frankly, it doesn't matter if there's 40 of us, 400 or 4,000. If everyone is making that, we're speaking with that one voice, and we're being really clear on what we say, and we're able to draw together the linkages across the things that are happening in the world and how they impact people's day-to-day lives, then our voice will be heard louder and louder, and our influence will get greater and greater. And with that, colleagues and comrades, just let me say it's a pleasure, and thank you very much for giving me a space to speak tonight.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tim. A really eloquent and articulate explanation of some issues which are not covered in the popular press. I read the Financial Times for my sins, and so I have come across some of the things you talk about, but they're not splashed across the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun in the way that they ought to be, really, because, as you say, they do concern the working class. They're presented to us as something very dry, very complicated, sort of outside the realms of our concern. But there's a reason for that, a good reason for that. And that's why I actually always recommend to people, you should read the Financial Times. Don't think it's not for you. The Financial Times is where the ruling class tells itself what it needs to know. And now all the things they don't want you to know are in there. So that's the paper for me. If you're going to read a bourgeois paper, read the Financial Times. You've highlighted some really important issues there. I can't go into depth on any of them, but I did want to touch on a few of them because they really matter to us, you know. We are in a time of capitalist crisis. There is a huge competition at the moment over how to find opportunities to invest these huge surpluses of capital, which have been amassed in such a tiny number of hands, these huge fortunes, that it's become almost impossible for their owners, the owners of these huge fortunes, to find profitable ways to reinvest their money, which is the whole function of capital. Under capitalism, the whole function of everything that happens in society is to make a pot of money get bigger. And that's it. That's why everything happens in a capitalist society. It has nothing to do with what people need, what they want, what makes their lives better. It is only to do with how capital can be made to grow into more capital. And at this time of the advanced decaying stage of capitalism, there's a huge economic crisis. There's a huge crisis of profitability. It's what fuels the drive to war, but it's also what fuels unemployment and poverty of the masses. And one of the ways in which the capitalists try to keep the economy going is on debt. And, you know, the packaging of debt, the pushing of debt, the encouraging of debt, the encouraging of the housing market, which encourages us to feel, ordinary people to feel they've got more money than they have got, and it's okay for them to live on debt because their house price will keep going up and that will cover it somehow. You know, this sort of magic that seems to happen where money comes out of nowhere. You know, all of this can come crashing down, and the government's making great efforts to stop it from coming crashing down. But the ever more complex ways of packaging and obscuring debt are really underpinning so much of our economy now. It's like we have a world which is increasingly standing on quicksand. And there are so many fracture points now, so many places where the tiniest little mishap now is going to send, you know, a huge section of the economy, the world economy, crashing down. And, you know, Greensill and these type of events are should be concerning to us, because they indicate that the whole lot is ripe for crashing down. You know, a few years ago there was a lot of talk that Deutsche Bank might be about to implode. You know, and the ramifications of that, you know, would have dwarfed 2008. And, you know, it's still perfectly possible. There's many fractures in the financial system right now. And as Tim rightly pointed out, in the end, who pays? It's always the working class. The ruling class, many of them have ways of hiding the money that they've gained, or pocketing it and walking away, leaving the liability behind them and going off to start again somewhere else with the money they pocketed from this particular bad apple that, you know, or outfit that went wrong after 10 years. But they've put a fortune away in various places. You know, I was reading Lenin's Imperialism recently and thinking about modern day examples, and I was trying to work out where do the imperialist countries invest their money? And it's very hard to tell, because so much global investment at the moment goes via places like the Cayman Islands or Mauritius or Singapore, and the City of London is another one. These places are not necessarily the place where money originates or where it's really going to. But when you look at, you know, who's the biggest investor in China, and it says Hong Kong and Singapore, that's clearly not true, is it? That's clearly not true. But there's all these ways of hiding and funneling money, which make it very difficult for us to understand what the real true picture is of who is exploiting whom and how, and where is the money going, where is it being put, how is it being hidden from the taxman and the public, you know, where all this money goes to and what's done with it. And in the end, as we said, it's the workers who pay. Marx 150 years ago pointed out in Capital that in the national economy and now in the world economy, it's profit which is privatized and debt which is nationalized. And nothing has changed since he wrote those words. We've seen it in the pandemic in spades. Absolutely. And Greensill were there tapping into public money to try to prop themselves up during the pandemic and taking the opportunity of the COVID fund. And there's David Cameron with his snout in the gravy train trying to facilitate that deal. And that's exactly, again, how the capitalist imperialist system works, this revolving door between big business, politicians, civil service. You know, they go round and round, and there is a establishment and a state machinery which is entirely set up to serve the interests of the huge corporations and has nothing to do with the electorate, which supposedly elects representatives to represent their interests. All of this machinery has nothing to do with our needs and our desires and our demands. You know, the huge amount that our government spent on COVID measures was almost entirely not directed at helping the people through the pandemic. It was almost entirely directed at boosting the profit lines of huge corporations, you know, with a little bit of backhanders for mates of the Tory party, you know, but actually the mates of the Tory party was not the main beneficiary. It was huge corporations who got most of the money. And very briefly, you touched on the Shrewsbury pickets. And again, I just wanted to point out there's a lesson for us from the Shrewsbury pickets that we really, really have to learn. You know, at the time when Des Warren and Ricky Tomlinson went to jail, what they needed then is just the same as what we need now, a mass movement of non-cooperation by working people that says no. It was unjust. The working class knew that was an unjust decision that they went to jail. If the whole of the trade union movement had stood together, they could have secured the release of those prisoners. We wouldn't be waiting 50 years to have those convictions overturned. We've got to stop relying on inquiries 30, 40 years down the line to finally get to the truth. We know the truth when it happens. We knew the truth when Iraq was invaded. We knew the truth when Ricky Tomlinson went to prison. You know, we can demand justice now if we organize ourselves, but we have to learn that lesson, that in order to demand our rights, we must be organized in numbers. That's the only way we're going to get what's coming to us. It's the only way we'll get any kind of social justice.
Can't imagine it's possible for anyone to be watching this tonight and not jumping around their front room going, yes, definitely, awesome. This is brilliant, a fantastic contribution there from Tim. Labour's loss is definitely our gain. Few more like you, please. Yeah, excellent. And we're going to squidge in a little one. We've gone over time, but yeah, whatever. We've got time for one more. Let's get Lauren on. Are you there, Lauren?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep. Well, very hard to follow all of the previous contributions, but I really just wanted to give a shout out to the Birmingham branch and highlight some of the fantastic work that we've been doing here. Led so ably by the General Secretary Paul Cannon and Assistant Secretary Ruben Lawrence. As I'm sure many of you are also busy with election work, we're sort of finding the same. Last week we were leafleting in West Bromwich, where Ruben himself is standing as a candidate. We had a fantastic turnout on Sunday with 10 party volunteers to distribute around 600 leaflets to the local area. And the week prior, there were 7 of us out in Wolverhampton distributing over 600 leaflets for Alan Russell, who I've seen his face on the chat.
Uh-oh, Lauren has frozen. Lauren has frozen. Are you there, Laura? Oh no, she's gone. That's such a shame. Yeah, the Birmingham guys have been doing sterling work, and their campaigns up there are really kicking off and taking off. There's more coming up in Manchester as well this weekend, so you'll be hearing about that. And all of the candidates are doing really well. All of the groups are doing really well all over the country. So I don't think we're going to get Lauren back. So I think I'll give you over to Joti now for your last word, Jotes.
Thanks very much, Tess, and thank you, Lauren. Hopefully you'll get to see this tiny last bit of the meeting on social media later. It is fantastic how many of our branches up and down the country, despite all the difficulties, are raring to go and get out and start campaigning. We have some brilliant candidates, not least in the West Midlands. I know Ruben's going to do us really proud, but there's loads more. And what is really exciting for me about these upcoming council elections in England, in the Senate elections in Wales, and in the Assembly elections in Scotland, is that for the first time in such a long time, there is the possibility for workers either to vote for a candidate who actually represents their interests, or to join in with a campaign for a candidate nearby. There is something for everyone to do to start to put down that marker that we so desperately need. And I really urge everyone who's watching, whether you've joined us or not, of course we want you to join us, but if you can't decide yet whether to join us, come and help. Come and meet us, come and join with us. There will be a campaign near enough to you for you to get involved. We need a mass mobilization of people on the streets to really hit the ground running as soon as we can and get the message out there to workers, to meet and talk to people and show them that we're something entirely different.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joti. And thank you so much to all our contributors. Thank you to everyone who's viewing and watching. Like Joti said, come along and help, or you can join the party. Visit our website. It's workerspartybritain.org. And like Chris said earlier, you can see loads of stuff on there, videos, past meetings, etc., etc. So anyway, we'll see you all again next week. Not sure if it'll be George or Joti, so we get a lucky dip. But whatever, it'll be brilliant. So thank you again, everyone. We'll see you all next week. Till then, stay safe. Take care. Nostar.